Welcome to Ignite Intimacy, a podcast exploring intimacy, romantic relationships, sexuality, and everything that relates to these hot topics. We're going in. Are you ready? This is your host, Laura Aisha. Let's do this. Hello, Ignite Intimacy community. This is your host, Miss Laura Aisha. It's so wonderful to be here with you today on another juicy episode of Ignite Intimacy. It's super cool because I recently featured the Glamourpuss MD on the podcast, Miss Olivia, and she referred me to Courtney, who we have on the line with us today, talking, and we're actually going to be diving deep into disclosure when you have, an STD, and just self-acceptance and the stigma around herpes, and some really, really great topics that lots of people want to know about, because one of our most listened to episodes is the other episode we did about herpes, Making Disclosure Sexy, which is episode 16. So I want to welcome Courtney to the podcast today. What is happening, Courtney?
Hey, Laura. Thank you for having me.
It's so great to be here with you. So, Courtney, where are you right now? In St. Louis?
Yes, ma'am. St. Louis, Missouri.
Oh, yeah. How hot is it out there?
It's humid. I got in my car yesterday and it was 111 degrees.
Oh, dang.
Oh, yeah. I just opened the doors and let the air blow for a little while and just stood outside for a little bit where it was probably 105 degrees, but
oh, Lord.
105 versus 111, there's a huge difference.
Cool, man. Well, yeah, we're all heating up here in the northern hemispheres, especially the north of the country. So, and it's, it's good. Heat is good. Heat, ignites things. And that is what this podcast is all about, is, just igniting conversations around things that I'm curious about and things that, our community is curious about. And so it's cool to be here with you. You're also a podcast host, Something Positive for Positive People. Tell us a little bit. So before we get into all of that, it's really great. I'm just super excited and to dive into this conversation. I also feel a little bit nervous, and the nerves is, I think, more excitement just about getting out of my comfort zone and just, being powerfully transparent about, I'm like, okay, insert tickle in the throat. It's funny, just paying attention to the body. And there was a situation I had recently with my roommate. We were talking about the gentrification in the neighborhood I live in Brooklyn. And I got this tickle in my throat out of nowhere. And I just kept coughing. And every time this one particular subject came up, I just kept coughing. So anyways, we're talking about herpes today, and disclosure and self-acceptance, and, dispelling some myths around herpes and the stigma around herpes. And I have herpes. So it's fairly newer thing for me to just talk openly and publicly about it. So voila, insert tickle in the throat.
How does it feel to say it? Now that you've gotten it out, how does it feel? Because that was the first time on your episode that you did, Making Disclosure Sexy. That was the first time you came out about it, right?
It was the first time, and I was both feeling nervous and powerful about it, because it's been, I think, more challenging to keep it on the low and to feel shameful about it, and then to feel weird about it when I bring it up, which is whenever I'm getting intimate with man, so, or whoever I'm getting intimate with, so it feels way more powerful to just be like, yeah, oh, by the way, I have herpes. So you should know that. And, if you have any questions about it and, all of that, let me know. And also, cool. Yeah. And so tell us about Something Positive for Positive People and why you started that podcast.
All right. So Something Positive for Positive People is a podcast where I talk to people who are living with or affected by STIs, sexually transmitted infections. And I try to not use the word disease because it has such a negative thought pattern behind it.
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
I started the podcast, and before it became a podcast, what it was just me basically telling people it was okay. So I've been diagnosed with herpes for a little bit over 7 years now, and it took me about 5 years to find Positive Singles, which is a dating site for people who are living with sexually transmitted infections. So if you have herpes, HIV, Hep C, they make dating easy for you because now you don't have to go through the disclosure process. You create a profile and you put what it is that you have, and it matches you with other people who have the same STI. So I was on there.
That's
and
awesome.
someone reached out to me. It was a young lady about my age, had HSV2, which is what I have, genital HSV2. And she reached out just asking questions and in need of a friend. So we became close, like close as you can be for having conversations online, and maybe a few conversations over the phone. But
You can get pretty close these days, I hear.
yeah, that's true, especially with things like Skype and Snapchat. You get real close. But
That's only what I hear.
what we hear, yep. So she confided in me one day. So she was in a relationship. She had a partner who was accepting of it. His response to her was, well, if you got it, we got it. And for whatever reason, she still felt the need to like continue to seek the male perspective of what to expect when you have herpes, because she was just like on edge waiting for him to have an outbreak. So she had a great job. She was doing a lot of, positive things from our conversations. She never let me see her. So to this day, I have it in my head that she's some kind of celebrity, but
That's
she never
awesome.
had real pictures or anything. But judging from like how our conversations went, I felt like she was some kind of like high profile individual. But she eventually opened up to me about wanting to commit suicide after her diagnosis. And
Wow.
I was just like, oh, whatever. And I
It's
just
kind of
kind of
crazy,
took it
right?
off. It is. It's so crazy because not once did that cross my mind, but after I heard her say that, I began to notice it a lot of different places.
Mm.
So I began to see it in the chat rooms, on people's blog posts, and then I had recently gotten into some of the secret Facebook groups for people who are living with herpes, and I started to see it there. And I was like, hey, y'all tripping. It is not that bad. But I'm a guy, and my perspective doesn't really do anything for a woman who's going through this. So I posted to one of those groups I'm in and was like, hey, who would be interested in sharing their experience about what it's like living with herpes? Because so often we hear so much of the negative behind it that
Mm.
we don't hear anything from people who've gone on to live normal lives because of that reason. They've gone on to
Yeah.
live normal lives. And a lot of I found that there was a podcast in 2014. I don't remember the name of it, but there was a lady who started a podcast. She was single. She was dating with herpes and just talking about it. And about 4 or 5 episodes in, I think she ended up with a significant other and the podcast stopped. So,
She's like, I'm no longer dating with herpes. Sorry.
yeah, I don't need this anymore. So
That's awesome.
after I started the podcast is when I noticed that. So I recorded a few conversations with people, and I'd see people posting, and I would just get their email address and send them the link. When it became overwhelming and I started like putting typos in email addresses and sending wrong links and things like that, I was like, okay, this is overwhelming. So I'm going to just put this up on YouTube and I'm going to direct everyone to YouTube. So eventually, after doing that, it got a little bit over 300 views fairly quickly, in my opinion. And I have very low expectations because it's not like I've been podcasting long at that point in time. But I thought to myself, okay, people are finding this. And YouTube is a video platform, but there's only audio here. We have very short attention span, so they could be kind of watching it, kind of not, or close out of it and go do something else and never come back to it. So in order to make it more useful, it was October, I believe, of 2017. That was when I decided to go on and make the investment on the podcast platform, and I began to upload the episodes there. So after doing that and sharing that, okay, now this is a podcast. This isn't me asking you to have a conversation with me anymore. And I started looking for guests. And the more that I posted different people's episodes, and some of them were open to being open about it, to the groups that we were in. And this was a huge step for them. So my first guest, Amy, we met up, and as creepy as this was, we met over Facebook. I got her number and met her at a gas station. She hops in my car. We drive around the block to a quiet place. And I'm like, this, in hindsight, that was a very, very dangerous
Oh my
situation.
God. And like, what were you
Uh,
driving around the block for?
oh my goodness. We ended up recording. We were in my car.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
oh,
That's awesome. So you were recording a podcast in your
yes.
car.
Yes. So I have like a little microphone that I plug into my iPhone, and I just put my phone on airplane mode, which I didn't know to do at the time. So I'm getting like text messages and stuff, and it's messing me
Uh-oh.
up. And the episode turned out really well. She showed up with her notepad and we laughed. She cried. And at the end of it, she gave me a hug and was like, this is the first time that I've spoken about this to
Mm,
probably anyone,
mm.
other than the people she disclosed to. And it was just
Wow.
very therapeutic for her. And like seeing that kind of, it compelled me to want to do more of it. So I did my own solo episode that nobody will ever hear except for the first
What?
I played for.
Why?
Terrible. So there was so many likes and ums and stutters,
Oh,
but
yeah.
through that conversation that I had was kind of how we came up with the podcast title. It was just, I want to do something positive for positive people and just show
Mm,
that life's not over with herpes just because we
mm-hmm.
don't hear anything neutral or positive. We hear, oh my God, I have the worst outbreak ever. I'm rejected. This is stupid. This sucks. I don't want to give this to anybody. And people really perpetuate the stigma through that negative mindset rather than, just becoming accepting, because it's
Mm-hmm.
challenging to find people who are living normal lives with herpes because it just it's not a thing for them until it's a thing, of course, like if there's an
Yeah.
outbreak at all.
All right. So the thing with herpes, and I don't know if it's the same. So is HPV, I don't even know this for sure. Is HPV, and we actually discussed this with Olivia. I should remember this, but I don't. Remind us again, Courtney, if you know, is HPV a strain in the same
It's
realm?
not herpes related.
Okay. Okay. Because I know there's a very, very high number of adults in the United States that have HPV.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is I look for people who have HPV, and I've asked, and it's like, well, is this even a thing? Is it stigmatized? And turns out, like, someone told me that I could potentially be making it worse by trying to get people who are living with HPV to talk about their life with HPV. If
Okay.
that makes sense. Like, there's no stigma behind HPV. These are the words from people who are living in the HPV community in public posts. So this particular statement has gone unchallenged publicly. So that's kind of how I gather my info
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
street, so to speak.
Yeah. You're like posting in Reddit and you're on
Mhm.
different chat blogs. What are some of the places where you find community online, just so we can share those with our community in the show notes?
So unfortunately, the people who are in the groups on Facebook who are living with herpes, you would have to find like a public group such as projectaccept.org, and maybe from there make connections and figure out how to get into the other herpes support groups, or even with HIV related groups, which I still to this day have not been able to find. I just post to Reddit anything HIV related when I have questions, or if I'm having a guest on soon to figure out what kind of questions to ask. But that's where to start, just looking for the support groups, because it took me 5 years to find them. I didn't know that they were out there, but until someone really like seeks you out, like through Positive Singles, for example, I was on there and someone was like, hey, do you want to be in this secret Facebook group? And I was like, ooh, that sounds
Mm.
cool. But
Hmm.
due to the privacy and secrecy of these kinds of groups, it's almost like someone has to find you and invite you into this super exclusive club.
Mm. Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. Super exclusive club for people with herpes. Who would have thought? There's also the H opportunity.
Hmm.
We feature Adriel Dale. He's founded the H Opportunity on episode 16 of Ignite Intimacy. So you can check out H Opportunity online as well. We'll have links to those in the show notes. But So cool. So yeah, there's a lot of stigma around herpes, and primarily because it is a virus that can live in your genital region. And at least here in the United States, I mean, more often than not, I come across people who have different levels of shame and, other disempowering contexts associated with their genital region and sex and sexuality. So, I've found that when people have cold sore on their lips, it's like no big deal, right? Mm-hmm. And then you talk about, well, I have herpes 1 or 2 in the genital region, and it's like, oh God, it can be. Anyways, it's not always that way, but it can kind of be this like, oh, really? So let's talk about just the stigma around herpes.
Yeah, absolutely. So in my experience and the perspective that's been shared with me, one very powerful way to look at the stigma of herpes is that it is the uneducated popular opinion. That's what stigma is to me at this point, because it's going unchallenged. And the experts on herpes aren't talking about herpes. And there's so many of us who, due to the stigma, are choosing to not challenge it. So if we're in a room full of people and someone makes a herpes joke, like, oh, don't kiss her, you'll get herpes, and just saying things that aren't true, or making herpes a joke, when it goes unchallenged, and the people who have herpes and aren't, dealing with this, and on top of things like depression, it just amplifies all of the negative emotions by allowing it to go on. And,
and the isolation and
yes.
Like feeling really separate from when actually, millions and millions and millions and millions of adults here in the United States carry either herpes 1, 2, or both.
Yeah. And another interesting thing to point out is that I had gotten tested for herpes before I tested positive for herpes. And when I got tested for it, I noticed that with the blood test that I did, I can't remember the exact numbers because I was in college at this point in time. And the count of the antibodies in my system were under what was necessary for me to have tested positive. What is interesting to me is that there was a presence of antibodies, yet I tested negative.
Wow.
So it leads me to wonder things like, okay, over time, did my antibody count go up to where I tested positive, or was I exposed to it previously, but not enough to test positive? Even though I tested negative, yet there were antibodies present, should that have been considered positive? So there's all these it's such a tricky thing to navigate. And what people don't understand that, I could have looked at that and gone, oh my God, so I'm positive for herpes, and gone on about, things accordingly then. But instead I went on afterward like, yes, I tested negative for herpes. But it's like in that hindsight now where I'm like, oh my God, there was a presence of the virus, and at any point you can be exposed to it or expose someone to it. And I went on thinking that I was negative and legitimately thinking that to be the case. But there's no telling if I was able to pass it on after having tested negative, even though the antibodies were present.
Yeah, well, and it's also what I found, because I get tested religiously at least a few times a year. And just for my own peace of mind.
As everyone should, though.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm like, please, everyone out there that's listening to this podcast, seriously, go get an STI and an HIV test. Like, just go freaking get one, and make sure you get them like at least twice a year. It's a responsible thing to do. And it gives you peace of mind. It gives your partners peace of mind. And it's shocking to me how many people I talk to who are like, oh, yeah, no, I don't get tested, or, oh, I get blood work done with my doctor at my annual physical every year. And I think that's fine. And, and I'm like, well, have you had unprotected sex with anyone in the last 6 months? Because you could be carrying something other than HIV and be at risk to giving it to someone, And
There's two important things there. So one being that we think that the doctors are testing us for everything, even herpes, but that's not the case. If you don't specifically request a test for herpes, then you're not being tested for herpes. There's no way to know you do or don't have it until you specifically request a test for it.
Yeah. And they don't, what I found, and this was my original point, is that they don't say like, would you like to get tested for herpes? It's something that you actually have to request. And I've heard people say they got pushback. I knew someone who had a herpes scare and was concerned that they had it. And they were like, oh no, we don't test for that, which makes no sense to me whatsoever.
Go somewhere else. Just go somewhere else. The other thing that I want to bring up is that when we often make the assumption that we can determine if someone, not we, but a general consensus is that we can make an assumption that we can determine what someone who has an STI looks like. That's not possible to do. I posted recently in one of the Reddit communities, hey, when is the right time to have the STD talk? And one person commented, and you can see how many people looked at it. And at this point, more than 1,000 people looked at it. But one person commented, this is exactly why so many people have STDs, because it looked like no one was talking about it or no one wanted to share their perspective. Now, granted, people could have just been like, oh, that's boring or whatever, looking for something more interesting. But I found that to be a very interesting thing that this person pointed out that was a reason that nobody was talking about it. How in this world where your next potential intimate moment with someone is literally a thumb swipe away or a message away, and you're not having a conversation about their sexual health or your sexual health, that should be a red flag to one of you. Because there's no such thing as safe sex. You can't say, oh, I wore a condom and think that everything's good. Condoms break. The only real thing we can do is communicate. We have a very strong sense of intuition when we're in touch with it. And there are instances where you may come into contact with someone who's offended by you asking that question, but more often than not, that should be a red flag to you if this person's getting defensive about you being concerned for your and their sexual health.
Absolutely. I'm like, anyone, like at this point, when I meet men who refuse or are like just nonchalant about whether they've been tested or about going to get a test, if there's like any question whatsoever, I'm just like, no, like next, like.
That's how you have to be. That's how you have to be.
Yeah. So yeah, it's an interesting journey. And as far as when to have the conversation, this is something that I believe I was diagnosed like 14 years ago. So it's been a while that I've been living with herpes, and I have been experimenting with when is the best time to have this conversation. And it certainly is more often than not better to have the conversation before anything gets hot and heavy, or before you're like actually lying there naked with someone. And I found that it's just better to just bring up the conversation and just open the conversation with like, so how do you deal with, like sex and protection? Do you normally use protection? Just starting the conversation there. I mean, we're all adults here. We're all, we can all be more curious about how we relate to sex and sexuality and how we take care of our hearts and our minds and our bodies in the space of intimacy, sex, and sexuality, and just opening up that conversation just very naturally, and like you said, Courtney, if someone is defensive or they're just like brushing it off, like, what, you think I have something? It's like, well, do you know if you have something or not? Because, I'm not a doctor and I don't actually have an STI test here to administer right now. So.
Yeah. And the response that you should look for when disclosing to someone is a thank you, like some sense of gratitude for
Yes.
being the one to bring it up, because they were
Yes.
probably in their mind thinking, okay, well, when am I going to have this conversation? Are we going to have this conversation? And it's
Mm-hmm.
so much easier to have when you can be transparent with someone and share, okay, I get tested regularly. This is where I stand. What about you? And then you open up the
Yeah.
floor for them to disclose to you any sexual health challenges that they may be dealing with, or you two can be like, oh my God, I just got my results back recently. My last partner was dot, dot, dot this far away ago. And you two can make an adult decision going forward from there on how you're going to proceed with the interaction. But
Yep.
I believe that communication is a heavy contributor to safer sex.
Absolutely. Well, we need to be communicating just like period
Hmm.
with regards to sex and sexuality. And like, I mean, it brings up just the whole consent conversation. And so a few things before we go into just more of like, I think we're just talking a lot about consent these days, right?
Right.
And I'm discovering just my own ignorance around consent. So I just want to mention a couple of things. I just got tested again, and it feels good to get tested.
Yes,
Oh
it does.
yeah. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm clean. That's right. Like I am really taking care of myself these days. And because there was a time when I wasn't. In my 20s, it was a bloody free for all,
I'm sorry.
And I had very few boundaries,
Yeah.
and it was like I didn't know how to stand my ground and say no. And I would totally give in and allow people to do things that I was not a yes, but I wasn't saying no. So that's like an area for all of us to just be aware of, like, where are we saying yes, where we really mean no? And where are we not saying what we want to say? And just like, let's all just start saying that stuff, and opening up the conversation. I also want to point our listeners to episode 70 of Ignite Intimacy. We featured Rachel Maddox. She's amazing. And she has a safer sex foreplay conversation that she has with new partners before they get hot and, into it and close off and in the bedroom or bathroom or car or wherever you are. So safer sex foreplay conversations, episode 70 of Ignite Intimacy, she drops some gems on that episode. So please do yourselves a favor and check that one out.
No, I definitely will.
Oh, you're going to love that one, Courtney.
Oh, yeah.
So Courtney and I got introduced and I was like, Courtney, check out the podcast. Just, check out a couple of episodes before we record so you get a feel for the flow and the style and everything. And it was just so great to have your text messages coming through.
Like, I tried this thing and it was awesome. And like,
my girlfriend loved it.
Yes, she enjoyed the thing that I tried on her.
Yeah, you're like, and now I'm learning about the female anatomy and female orgasms, and this is amazing. Like,
so guys, yeah, go check out those episodes. I have a screenshot of the episodes that you sent me to check out, and those are the ones that were
nice. Awesome. Cool. Yeah, there's some good juicy stuff on here. So let's talk about, first of all, dispelling the myth, like shifting the stigma around STIs and herpes. And like, I wonder just how much like the word is like a scary word, and like,
it is.
And like,
it is until you get it.
Yeah. So, I know we talked about going into consent here, but I'm leaning more towards when you get it, right? Mm-hmm. Like it can feel like this like devastating blow to your life and your sex life. So you've got an episode about this. Let's talk a bit about, like, is my sex life over? Is my life over? And like, cause I know when I got it, I thought everything was just done. I was like, oh my God, it's like, this is not good. This is really going to screw things up for me. And how do I even proceed?
So when you're diagnosed with herpes, the only information that you have about herpes is from the stigma. It's what you knew as a person without herpes from people who don't have herpes. And once you have it and you've had it, you become an expert at your body. You become an expert on herpes, and you're doing everything you can to prepare yourself for what's to come. And in doing that, Like there's so many different angles to take on it because you can all of a sudden begin like I did. I changed my diet and I began exercising. These were the first things that I searched for on Google. If you Google herpes, the worst possible things pop up. If you Google how to manage herpes or how to live a normal life with herpes, things in that nature, things more specific, you come up with avoid certain foods, work out, manage your stress. And so I began to do that. I began to work out regularly. I began to cook my food. I sought out a personal trainer and a nutritionist, and he showed me that I was eating like crap. And
Amazing.
he made me write everything down, and I brought it to him. And it's funny that one day he was like, Courtney, you ate fucking KFC? And I was like, and I looked him straight in the eye. I was like, but I got the grilled chicken. He's like, it's fucking KFC.
Well, yeah, it's like
I would
factory
never
farm
forget the
chicken, I'm
look in his
assuming. And
face.
like, you know,
Yeah. But after doing that and, not having, I'm one of the fortunate people who I had my first outbreak. And then at any point in time, if I felt any other tingling sensation, I describe it as scratching an itch. There's a sensation you get right after that. That's kind of like a kind of feeling. So that feeling, if I have that and it's ongoing, is how I feel an outbreak's coming on. So like I said, I got very familiar with my body. And for a while, I used to I'd pee and then wash my hands for 2 minutes, or whenever I took a shower, I'd be mindful not to touch my genitals and then my face so as not to spread it. I didn't touch people. And that was the stigma and its hold over me. The first time I forgot to wash my hands for a full minute, or the first time that I masturbated and fell asleep and ended up waking up and rubbing the sleep out of my eyes and nothing happened, I was like, okay, what's the deal here? And every person's experience is completely different, of course, but you really have to find out what works for you. You have to begin to develop a relationship with your body and go on from there.
I just want to honor and acknowledge you, Courtney. You are so powerful. And the way that you share about this and you share about yourself and your experience and your body, and it is so beautiful. And I'm listening to you and I'm just like, this is a man. This is a man, just sharing with so much power and freedom around it, and it's like this kind of sharing that gives other people freedom. So I just want to thank you for being who you are and taking a stand for this cause and for everyone, past, present, future, who will deal with, recognizing that they have something and the journey into self-love and self-acceptance.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And it wasn't always like this, I'll tell you that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And it's an interesting thing to point out is that I didn't realize that herpes was the cause of a more so physical representation of a lot of other things that were going on. So whenever I talk about it, I say herpes was a speed bump that made me slow down and look at other things that were going on.
Yep.
I find that in my research and my experience, for masculine and feminine traits, the most attractive features are decisiveness in the male, for the masculine, and then sociability for the feminine. And this is just I post all these different survey things to different groups to get feedback on. And I've learned that I was not decisive, and that having herpes kind of made me look at that and so many other things in my life that were going on, that herpes began to become irrelevant, just dealing with my decisiveness and my career field and what I was doing at that time and how my boundaries, there were no boundaries. So having to learn how to say no to things and people was part of the development of being able to talk about this in such a way. And there's so many things and so much that I want to share with you, but I know we're limited on time. But the guests who've come on, everyone has expanded my personal perspective about what it means to live with and manage a life with herpes, just navigating life, having herpes, and if you listen to any of the episodes, I always tell people, if you replace herpes or HIV with any other life challenge, you have a story of perseverance. Like everyone's going through some kind of thing. And when we begin to recognize and look at people for, we recognize ourselves in other people, and we can just see that whatever their life challenge is just a unique expression of the same source of where we all come from.
Totally. Well, yes, you are speaking the truth now. It's like just taking time to reflect and identify, like you said, it was a speed bump for me too. It all sort of happened around the same time. And I remember my dear, dear friend Moon Johnson, who passed away several years ago, he said, Laura, if you ever want to have like loving relationship, like, something of value and like long term, and you've got to stop just like going from here to there and this one and that one. And it was like, or to the ones that really didn't have my best interests at heart or their own, the ones that were lying and cheating and just not being transparent and definitely not getting tested, So it's like, it can actually create an environment where there's just a deeper sense of self, more power and more freedom and full self-expression, because when I just bring it out and I just say it today from where there's like barely anything, if anything, in the space around it. There's like no shame. There's no, it's just like, oh, by the way, it's my responsibility to let you know that I have herpes, and we can talk about it. We can go online and look up some stuff about it. And I'm here if any concerns come up for you now or in the future that you want to talk about it. And that may mean that someone says, actually, no thanks. Mm-hmm. And that's okay, because it actually helps you weed out people that weren't really the ones anyways.
Yeah. And your partners aren't going to, the way I see it is your people are either going to also have it or accept the fact that you do. And the rejection at that point in time feels like it's an attack on you, but it's their boundary. It's them accepting their health. That's how we all should be. You have to be. It's their version of self-care. They're taking care of themselves, and you should be able to take care of yourself to, not settle, because we can overlook red flags with people seeking acceptance. If someone may not seem as interested in us as we are in them, we may put them on a pedestal. We may overlook the fact that they have, things that go against what we want. Or if someone doesn't want to have kids and you do, and you may be like, well, I could probably still be with them and adopt. Like when you start to compromise your morals, you find yourself in a position where you're not going to be happy. You're not setting yourself up for a successful relationship or a healthy relationship just because you're settling. Like, no, you should never feel like anyone is settling for you. And just as you shouldn't ever settle for anyone. So now
that's right.
You've got this awesome filtering mechanism for people. And I mean, I've used it. I hear a lot of women who use it to like scare dudes away. It's it can be a powerful thing when you allow it to be. And this is just speaking for anyone who may be newly diagnosed and listening to this, or who's had herpes and is struggling to deal with it. Because first, I mean, just so you know, your sex life is not over. Your dating life is not over.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I've had better sex than ever after the diagnosis.
So being able to have that conversation.
And like amazing lovers and just, amazing intimate experiences. And so keep the faith, just like lean on resources like Courtney's podcast, Something Positive for Positive People. Check out episode 16 of Ignite Intimacy. Also I think it's the most recent episode 77 with Glamourpuss MD. We've got some good stuff on there. Glamourpuss MD also has a video about herpes. She actually might have a few videos about herpes. And she is on Courtney's podcast, Something Positive for Positive People. So, well, Courtney, there's a lot more to say, and we're going to keep the conversation rolling in other, environments and platforms, and, we'll keep communicating about this. And how can people find your podcast and your work online?
So Something Positive for Positive People can be found from a Google search, of course. And then it's on almost every podcast hosting site. I've tried to claim it everywhere. So are you ready? Get ready to write this down. Podbean.com, Podchaser, Podbay FM, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, iTunes, Spotify. It's just got added to Spotify as well. So it's all over the place. I personally can be found on Instagram. That's where I'm most active, at H on my chest. It's HONMYCHEST. I'm on there. I'm on Twitter at H on my chest, Reddit and Tumblr at H on my chest. And there's a Facebook page, Something Positive for Positive People. I know all my Facebook friends are probably getting tired of me posting about herpes and HIV. So I just went on and created a Facebook page specifically for that. So if you want to follow that, like it, you can find me on there as well. If you want to get added to any of the secret groups in your community, or you want to find out about them, feel free to reach out and I'll do my best to connect you with someone who can connect you to those support resources in your area.
Amazing. Courtney, you are a star. I am so grateful that Olivia connected us, and just keep shining your brilliant light and keep doing the good work, man. It's really, really powerful.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for having me, Laura.
Oh yeah, all day. And Ignite Intimacy community, you heard it here. We're talking more about STIs and herpes and disclosure and destigmatizing this stuff, talking about it openly and loving and accepting yourself through positive diagnosis. So stay strong, keep the faith, keep going, love yourself. Let's love ourselves and each other, and keep shining our lights, because, the world needs it, and a lot right now. So love y'all. Thank you so much. Hop over to iTunes, leave us a rating and a review, and we will see you on the next one. Stay blessed, and ciao for now. Thanks for tuning in to another conversation on the Ignite Intimacy podcast hotline. We love that you choose to spend your time with us. Check us out at igniteintimacy.com. Subscribe to us on iTunes and leave us a review and a rating. It helps more people know about us. We love to hear from you. You can email us with questions, comments, or suggestions to hello@igniteintimacy.com. And tell your friends. Music was arranged by Jason Pfaff and Mike Corey, and this podcast is produced by yours truly, Laura Aisha. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next one. In the meantime, let your light shine bright and ignite your intimacy.